Good evening. I'm Robert Van de Noort, Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Reading, and we hope that you are all keeping safe and you're all keeping well. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the third event in our Spring Alumni Lecture Series. Now, this series is focused on COVID stories from the frontline, which features a range of our alumni who have played a significant role in how we have all worked together to understand and manage the pandemic and its impacts. Tonight, we're going to hear about the impact of the pandemic on the music industry, and we're delighted to be joined by our guest speaker and alumna, Emma Banks. Now, let me introduce Emma first. Just give me a few minutes. So Emma is now a co-founder of the London office of CAA, or in full, Creative Artists Agency. This is a leading entertainment and sports agency where she represents many of the world's leading musicians, including Katy Perry, Muse, Arcade Fire, Hot Chili Peppers, Florence and the Machine, and Kylie Minogue. In 2018, Emma became the first female executive and first agent to receive the prestigious Music Industry Trusts Award, the MITS. And doing so, she joined the ranks of previous honorees such as Roger Daltrey, Sir Elton John and Bernie Taupin, Sir George Martin, Simon Cowell, Michael Eaves, and Annie Lennox. Emma, welcome back to the University of Reading.
It's lovely to be back virtually. It would be nicer if we were all together, but this will do.
Thanks, Emma. Great to have you, virtually back at the University of Reading then. So this evening, Emma has kindly agreed to take part in a Q&A session with me. I will also open questions to you, our attendees, so please do submit them in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can do this at any point in the evening. And what I will do is I'll attempt to answer, to put as many of your questions to Emma as we can do before we finish at 7:30. And please bear in mind, my knowledge of music may not be wholly up to date. So when you put your questions, make sure I understand them and can ask it in the right way. Now, if you don't want to put a question, but you see questions appearing in your Q&A box and you really want that particular question to be asked, please click the like button and then I will organize the questions that you submit so that I can put the questions most liked by you to Emma. Right, Emma, that's it, I think, for all of us. Can I start with the conversation and ask you the first question? As you're an alumna from the University of Reading, famous for your work in the music industry, but you graduated in food science here, and I'm intrigued to ask you how your journey led into a career in the music industry.
Well, it has to be said that while food science doesn't look like the obvious route, there is absolutely no way that I would be in the music industry if it hadn't been for Reading University. When I wanted to be a vet, then I wanted to be an actor. I got a bit of a talking to by my parents and decided that food science was a great degree to do because everyone needs to eat. So it was, food science or probably undertaking were two that I thought had a job at the end of them. So I came to Reading and I got involved in the RAGS organisation, doing fundraising, and I was there end of the 80s. So student unions were not funded at that point at all. Our illustrious leaders at that point sort of actively hated students, I think. And so the ENTS part of it didn't really happen. And we started doing all the gigs, myself, a guy called Ian Richards, who was a year above me at the university, and the RAGS committee. And that's really how it started. I started promoting shows. We had to make money because we were raising funds for charity. Used to do the Beer Fest and all of those things. But yeah, that's really how I got the love of the business, wanting to get into the music industry. I loved the mix of art and commerce. It was before we were all using the internet. So when it came to making a poster, we were, using the photocopier and Letraset, and it was all very punk rock. And so at the end of my 3 years, and I did a placement in my second year at Marks and Spencer's, which was a big deal, and I loved it. I got paid more for I think the 3 months at Marks and Spencer's than I did for probably the 5 years when I started in the music industry. But I just decided that this looked like a life that I wanted to get involved with and to be able to help people. So I decided that I'd try and give it a shot. And about a year after leaving Reading, I did get a job as a sort of a junior booker, so to speak, at a company called Wasted Talent. And I started there in September 1990. And I've pretty much done the same job ever since, just climbed up the ladder a little bit.
So anything from food science has moved into your life as is, or have you forgotten all about it?
How can I ever forget? You know what? I haven't forgotten all about it until I look at the books that I used to read doing a food science degree that I actually found in my parents' garage over the January lockdown, because I went and stayed with them. And I honestly have no idea how I understood a single thing in them. It's absolute another language to me. But no, I like to tell people that polar bear liver is poisonous, which I did learn at Reading University. Apart from that, the actual food science maybe doesn't get applied, but I think a lot of the life lessons that you get at university, and that was the first time I ever lived away from my parents, those are all things that you keep using.
Yeah, and it's always so interesting to hear, well, students, graduates, and alumni's recollections. It is often not, well, hopefully it is the academic experience as well, but there is so much more to university than just that, isn't it? Yeah, can I just talk a little bit about, we will have to move into the pandemic, and so, but personally, how has the last year impacted on you?
I've worn trainers a lot, and I never have done that before. I actually put on makeup for today. It was quite an event. I just about remembered how to do it. It's been massive. I mean, I remember back in sort of January, February of last year, and we are an international company. We are booking shows all over the world. Japan, South Africa, Australia, Europe, doesn't matter where. And we started seeing the beginning of the year, this problem, this virus. And I had a band out in Asia in February, middle of February, and literally as fast as we could go from country to country, the virus was catching up with us. And we ended up, I think, playing 1 out of 4 shows. And each time we were due to go to the next country, and the promoter would be going, no, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. This country's got it under control. By the time the poor band had landed, the authorities had shut everything down. And you saw the sort of march, didn't you, of this virus across the world. And I remember having a board meeting with my co-directors of CAA globally, and I'm the only person on the board in Europe. Everyone else is in the States. And sometimes maybe there's a slightly more insular view there because it's such a big place, you don't need to worry about the rest of the world. And I said, I think we're going to have a big problem with this virus. And literally it was like, don't be so silly. The next meeting we had 3 days later, it was DEFCON 10 and everybody was in an absolute pickle. And, suddenly everything was shut. All the shows were shut down. People got a lot of negativity. The last artists that were trying to finish off a show, some of them got a lot of stick in the media. They didn't do anything wrong. Nobody had told them they had to stop, and they were trying to accommodate the fans. But pretty quickly, everything was closed. And I remember when we closed CAA down, it was like, we'll shut it for 2 weeks and hopefully everything will be fine. And here we are, 14, 15 months later, and we're still not back in our offices and probably won't be for a little bit longer. And so we had all these shows and people with tickets and everyone going, well, what's happening? What's happening? And so while there are certain parts, if you were the actual musician, you pretty much downed tools and you couldn't do anything. as an agent, or the managers involved, we've all been scurrying around behind the scenes, working out when can we reschedule to, I had shows that were May last year that got rescheduled to May this year. They're now rescheduled to May of next year. And, goodness me, let's hope that they all happen. It's certainly starting to look better. But I think we have to look beyond the UK, where we're in pretty good shape, and hope that everybody else, because touring is exactly that. It's going from country to country consecutively, and a couple of holes in that routing makes an entire tour fall over. And I've been one of the lucky ones. CAA is a big company. We're well diversified. I'm obviously on the music side, but we have a big sports department in the UK. We do TV, we do film, we do brands, all kinds of things. And some of them have done really well through the pandemic. So I've been lucky that, we've furloughed some people, but I've been employed the whole way through. But there are guys that work in the venues, or they do security, or they're the guys that go on the road with the bands, who literally their pay stopped and they have had no work. And some of them have been able to find other jobs in the meantime, but they're not necessarily the jobs that they are either trained for or want to do, or are in their comfort zone. But there's been a lot of people that have really, really suffered, and many of them are self-employed or, single person companies, and have also fallen through the cracks of the support that they can get from the government. So it's been a very, very hard time. And you can say the same for the theatre industry as well, similarly, very similar.
And the artists you look after, how have they survived the pandemic? Some of them have clearly been streaming some of their music, but all their creative inspiration and uses, what was that outlet? How have they survived 15, 16 months of not being able to play in front of live audiences?
I think they've just had to survive. The streaming shows, there have obviously been some bigger ones and some incredibly exciting streaming events that have happened, but it's a tiny drop in the ocean compared to what everybody would normally have been doing. You can do one streaming gig, whereas you might do 150 shows on a global tour. And the streaming gig probably, the biggest streaming gigs have probably sold 200,000 tickets globally, but the majority of them have maybe sold 5,000 or 10,000 tickets. And when you look at that and you go, okay, depending on where you're broadcasting from, you have to pay VAT on the ticket. You have to, and that VAT rate in the UK has not been reduced. So if you have a live gig, the VAT rate is reduced at the moment to 5%, will go to 12.5% and then back to 20 next year. But you have to pay your 20% VAT. You have to pay your performing rights organisation, PRS currently saying it's 10%. And then you haven't rehearsed, so you need to actually pull everything together. So as a financial offering, it's really hard to make any money when you do it as a one-off event. So I think, artists have been, I think that lots of them have spent this time writing new material. They've also, we've done far more podcasts with clients that we have. So, a bunch of people, be it Youngblood or Eve and, various, all putting their own podcasts together, which they will continue when the pandemic is over, because they're enjoying it. It's a great way to get to people. It's a nice income stream if it does well. So they've done that. There's been books written. There's been, people talking to the theatrical world, but quite a lot have been probably sitting at home, waiting, hoping, and using up their savings, really.
So when as we're opening up, hopefully, do we see an explosion of some of the amazing artistic discovery and innovation? People have been having the time to writing these songs, or something really to look forward to?
I hope so. I hope probably that they wrote more songs when it was lovely and sunny in April and May last year than, during a very depressing lockdown in January. because it's a little bit like those albums that are all about your breakup, aren't they? They're fine, but it would be nice to have something cheerful. But I'm sure, yeah, I mean, it's been problematic, I think, for new and young artists, because they haven't had the outlet. You know, even if you look at radio play, you know, for a long time, TV was not really happening, was it? There were, even the chat shows were off air for a little while. You know, when there's no live available to these young artists at all, when you can't promote something by putting a poster on the street because there's nobody on the street, or there's no one traveling on the train or the tube, people are not listening to the radio in the same way they were. It's been really difficult for young artists. And for those that want to find a manager, you know, managers only make money when the client that they have earns money. And so even the big management companies, they haven't made any money because huge amount of their revenue comes from live touring. So you have new and upcoming artists desperate to find a manager, but the managers are already in the hole financially, and you don't make any money on a new artist often for years. Yeah, there's always the exception that proves the rule, but majority of people, it takes a long time to get to a point where it's actually a revenue generator.
Interesting. And just thinking about the audiences for your concerts, how do you think they will come out of lockdown? I mean, we've seen some, you know, headlines that said that tickets for Reading Festival were sold out in absolutely no time. You think there's a real, you know, demand for concerts, and that you know you will recover very quickly once we come up fully out of lockdown?
I think one of the recovery issues will just be people knowing that we're out of lockdown and we're staying out of lockdown, and that it's safe, and that we don't just go, we're out of lockdown, all the numbers are up, it's a bit dangerous, but we've said we're not going into lockdown again, so therefore here we are. I think what we're seeing at the moment is young people who feel much more confident about going out, because the statistics have shown us that generally, and this is a mass generalization, and I am not a scientist, well actually I am a scientist, aren't I, because I've got a food science degree and a BSc from Reading, but I would not consider myself an active scientist at this point in my life, and I'm not a medical professional, but you know, it would seem that if you are younger, you've got more chance of, if you get COVID, not getting super sick. And so you take your chance and you want to live your life and you want to go out with your friends. So we've seen Reading Festival, Creamfields, All Points East, big events and tours that have gone on sale for younger demographic artists, selling incredibly well because people are just desperate to get out. I apologize, the dog may go a bit crazy in a minute because someone's just going to come into the house, I think. So we've got that. I think artists that skew to an older demographic, we're seeing people being a little bit more cautious about buying a ticket, about committing, and about whether they want to go out yet. I think those people want to go, okay, it's definitely safe, I'm not in a rush, we're all good. So undoubtedly, it's going to be a boom town. As soon as we're really, I think, in the clear, people are going to want to go out. I want to go out. People that don't even want to go to gigs want to go to a gig because they want to feel that euphoria of being in a crowd and enjoying it. But I don't want to go to a gig with a mask on. I can't do that. So I think there are going to be some people that just wait for a little bit.
Yeah. And then so the UK looks pretty well positive at the moment, but as you said earlier, you know, most of your tours are actually touring internationally. So well, in terms of the pandemic and the kind of the traffic light system that the government is talking about, visiting other countries, is that really helping you or hindering you? I mean, I can imagine the answer. And how would you overcome those challenges, not being able to do international tours as freely as you would normally do?
Well, I suppose we just have to be patient, honestly. We don't have any other option. And if you're based in the UK, then your financial outlay, if you decide to accept a gig in Paris or Lisbon, is slightly less than if you were for instance, based in the US or Australia. But, I think the fact that you can have almost lightning lockdowns in certain places, the fact that the quarantine rules, I suspect, are going to, come in and out, and we're never quite going to know where we stand, means that for a lot of us, we're being very cautious. And the majority of my touring, which is not domestic, so not UK artists in the UK, I'm probably leaving until next year. And, and that's potentially sort of, February, March. I mean, as a rule of thumb, we've sort of gone, from March next year, we all hope that everybody should be vaccinated if they're happy to be so, and they can be. And so we've got a better chance, because if you've got a tour of 10 cities and 2 of them drop out, that's potentially your profit margin. And if you end up somewhere and then suddenly that becomes on a quarantine list, you can't go to the next place. So it's way more complicated than even going, you can play a show in that country. You've got to think about where you're coming from, where you're going to. What happens if one of the band members or one of the crew guys happens to have COVID with asymptomatically or with symptoms, which shows the day you arrive in Paris for your gig, and then everybody has to quarantine. You can't go anywhere. You have, if you've got people on the road, you have to pay for their hotels. You have to pay their wages and their living expenses, and you can't get any insurance right now. So there is no insurance market for COVID-related cancellations, and that's why you're seeing festivals July and August time. Quite a lot of them have cancelled, not because they possibly couldn't play the show, but because there is not enough, definite about it. And many of these festivals, particularly the big ones and the real, the Glastonburys or the Boomtown kind of eventicized, that's probably not a word, festivals, they're millions and millions of pounds of infrastructure. And who would spend that with no insurance if possibly your government, for the best reasons possible, say, actually, your festival can't run? It's impossible.
Talking about international touring, a couple of questions have come in around the impact of Brexit on British musicians touring, or indeed international musicians touring. Well, what's your view in that? Is Brexit really going to be damaging for the future of international artists and their touring opportunities?
Brexit is the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brexit is going to be costly for British artists. Very. We're slowly getting to grips. I think you can look at it 2 ways. The first way is we had COVID, so we haven't had to deal with the mess of Brexit. The fact that a Brexit deal gets done, 350 days or 340 days into the transition period. Transition meaning the time we were changing. So we had no transition period. We went from everything's the same to everything has changed. We haven't actually had any test cases to see whether what we think is going to happen will happen. And if COVID hadn't been, the pandemic that it is, we would by now probably have resolved the Brexit issues, because if you live in Spain and all the shows get cancelled because it's so impossible to get the UK artists there, your government will do something about it. I mean, just undoubtedly that will happen. As it is, there's been no shows. No one's really focused on it enough. I mean, we as an industry we're doing a huge amount of work on it. But, right now we've gone from a place, we think, because nothing's definite in Spain, where every person that goes into Spain to play a show will have to have a visa, which requires a trip to the consulate, which just organising them is a nightmare, and will cost somewhere between £200 and £350 a person. Now that doesn't sound a lot, but if you're a fairly regular band and you're playing, I don't know, a 2,000 capacity venue, you're probably earning between 10 and 20,000 euros gross. There's 25% tax to pay. there's all of your costs to pay, and then let's say there's 10 of you in the tour party. 3,000 euros has gone just on getting there. It's impossible. The sums won't add up. So we as an industry are talking to the Spanish promoters, and I use Spain, there's other examples. The Dutch actually are excellent, and we can go and play in Holland as many times as we want, and there won't be a problem. But, you know, there are ongoing discussions. I think the even bigger issue is that of trucking. And so there's a lot, you know, having to have a carnet to get your guitar in and out of somewhere. It's going to a lot of paperwork, and we'll see how much they enforce everything. But, you know, the government, I think, understand now what a big deal it is. You know, it seemed that if you were a fisherman, which is an industry which is probably worth, I don't know, 10% of the live music business, you got listened to in a big way, and that became a very political issue. The money that we lose as a country if we can't have our UK artists touring properly in Europe is way bigger than the fishing industry.
Mm. Yeah, I think quite a lot of us make comparisons with fishing industries, and for quite good reasons. And the other way around, Emma, are you also involved in European bands and artists who find Brexit from the other perspective, that actually coming to the UK would be an essential part for them and for their career and development and so, but just can't make it anymore? Is that an issue, or do we all see it from?
I think that will be less of an issue, partly because it's one country. I mean, you can get a certificate of sponsorship as a band, whoever you are, for, I think the cost is £22. I mean, it's very low. The relative cost of coming into the UK, we are giving better terms, I think, to European artists than we are getting back. And that's looking at Europe as a whole. So, you know, as I say, the Dutch rules, and quite a lot, you know, there's plenty of countries where you will be able to go in and out. You will still have trucking issues, and you will still have carnet issues. But I don't think that there will be too much of a problem of European artists coming into the UK. And the UK generally is a good, strong touring market with pretty generous fees. So it's not perfect by any means, but I think it's more difficult going the other way right now. And just talking about incoming bands, when can we see bands from the United States coming back in the UK? I think that will depend entirely on, number one, quarantine rules, and feeling very, very confident that shows will happen, because obviously when you've committed to the cost of flights and freight from the US, you've really got to be sure things will happen. So there are American bands committed to Reading and Leeds, and I think, you know, potentially are committed to doing the quarantine. I mean, you know, I'm a CAA client, we're in for the Brits, and they're doing the Glastonbury live stream. They did the 10 days quarantine because they wanted to be here so much. But again, you know, they don't have so many band members and people around them, and it's an investment, and they decided to take it. They're in a lucky position. They're very successful. They can afford to do it. A lot can't. So I think generally we will see more US artists coming over next year. I think there'll be limited amount of people that come this year. And I think, you know, Australian and New Zealand artists have the problem that if they then want to go home, they have to do a very, very strict quarantine. And some of them are not even, you know, it's hard to do. So I think they, again, will probably not come over. Because if you imagine that you possibly had to quarantine in and then quarantine out, that's, you know, almost 4 weeks of sitting in a hotel room with no windows.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just pick a question. It links not so much to the touring, but to the impact of COVID. I'll just pick a question from the audience. Damien notes, he said lots of grassroots venues have been hit badly by COVID, which in turn has massively impacted grassroots and just starting musicians. You already talked a little bit about this, but do you think there will be a COVID-created talent hole over the next few years, or will it be the other way around? Maybe an explosion of talent coming out?
Will there be a hole? I hope there won't be a hole. I mean, certainly, I think artists that were probably just about to launch as the COVID pandemic hit are going to really struggle because they're now old news, and everybody has a very short attention span and moves on quite quickly. You know, grassroots music venues have had a tough time for sure. You know, a lot of artists have been amazing and done fundraisers. You know, the Music Venue Trust, which is an incredible organization for grassroots music venues, has done a lot of work helping get fundraisers running, and the, oh gosh, what's it called? The COVID relief fund, the over £1 billion that the government put aside. Quite a lot of grassroots music venues that were really in trouble have been able to avail themselves of that. It is by no means, great, but most of them, and again, broad brushstrokes, most of them have survived. And I think, the majority of them are planning on opening on Monday in a socially distanced, safe way. They've got a fantastic campaign called Revive Live, where, they're explaining all of the COVID-related measures they're putting in. So, I think bands are going to be absolutely up for it. And particularly if you don't have high costs, so you can afford to do something with a reduced capacity, I think that will be good. So of course we're going to lose some people. Of course we are. We can't. There's nothing we can do about it. But I think now it's looking a bit brighter.
Can I turn the conversation a bit more to your to yourself as well? How have you coped in the pandemic? Professionally, personally, but also how do you come out of it? How let's say like this, I at the university I notice quite a lot of colleagues who feel a little bit anxious coming back to the university, even though nothing has really happened here. And after having been away for so long, it's really hard. But in your industry and for yourself, it must be, many times this, you go from being home alone to being in large audiences. How do you think that will work for yourself?
I think it will be okay, because I think that I think it will be harder probably for younger people that don't have all of the muscle memory that I have, and it's not the same. But I compare it to, after the terrible terror attacks in Paris at the Eagles of Death Metal concert, and I know people that died. I know a good friend that was shot and was in intensive care for a long time, who's safely back at work now, and a great promoter in France. And we all gigs shut down for a bit after that, as the world figured things out, or even actually, sort of 9/11 and stuff like that. The first time I went to a gig after that, getting there, there was a slight feeling of anxiety, but once I was in the gig, it just felt back to normal, and you forgot. That's I think the amazing sort of healing power of music, and everyone being together and wanting to enjoy themselves. They got on with it. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Because we've all got used to avoiding people on the pavement and going, oh no, you're a little bit too close in the checkout queue but I think once we're told it's okay, I don't think it'll take that long personally to get back to normal. I really don't. I hope not. As I say, I think it will go in stages, and we will see concerts and events which will have more young people who feel a little bit more invincible, and some of whom have never stopped going out, quite frankly, regardless of what the government had told them to do. I think they'll be out there and they'll be having a whale of a time. You just look at the test events in Liverpool, a couple of weekends ago. There was nobody standing in the back going, oh goodness me, I don't like this. They were all jumping up and down, hugging, kissing. I didn't go to them, but I think there were plenty of people throwing up before the first act had finished. They had a good time.
Good.
So, and that to me is good. It's good news right now.
So the lesson I should take from you is just say to people, come and be part of the gig and you'll be all right. Don't worry too much about it.
Well, I think nobody is going to put on a gig thinking that there will be any problem. You know, the amount of time and effort and research that is going into making sure events are COVID secure, whether it's air circulation and pinch points in venues and making sure the capacities are right, and, you know, possibly having to show a vaccination or a negative COVID test. You know, who knows whether that might be something that we have to do later on. You know, no one wants to be the super spreader event, for sure. And I think all of the events we're doing, and obviously in the next week or so, there's already a little bit of data from the Liverpool events. There will be more. There are more events that are being trialed. There's obviously also sporting events, and you can, you know, associate all of the data together. I think we'll be able to prove that it's no more dangerous than going to the supermarket or getting on the tube or whatever it might be.
Okay, I've got a question here of somebody which I can link in our conversation. Somebody simply asked, is it hard to get agency representation, and what requirements or what qualities do you look for? And maybe extend the question to saying, so what qualities are you looking for in this post-COVID world?
It is hard to get agency representation, yes, because there are thousands and thousands of people that want it, that want to be pop stars, rock stars, actors or whatever, and there's very few opportunities for them. So as an agent, we are constantly, I suppose, looking for that person or that act that's super special, that is super, that has that like je ne sais quoi, that you go, you are unlike anybody else. That's what we need. You know, being a good singer is not enough. You've got to be singing amazing songs, or you've got to have and phenomenal charisma and so many things.
Yeah, and your dog has made his way back in regardless. There's a question here from Daniel, who is actually asking very much that question. Not sure whether you want to extend it, but what is it that makes a song or an artist famous? You know, what is it? You're saying it is not just how well somebody can sing their songs, but it is more, isn't it? And I just wonder if you can help Daniel a bit on his way. How does he become famous?
Do you know what? If you want to become famous, you probably need to. There's a very famous manager who, when he signed his artists, you know, and they're like, well, how can you make us famous? He said, you know, put your stage makeup on and shoot the president. That makes you famous. It's not a good idea. It's not what you should do, but that's what. So wanting to be famous is not the game I'm in. Fame is a byproduct of talent. You know, celebrity, fame, they're a weird thing, aren't they? Because you can get that from putting a bikini on and sitting on a beach on the television, you know, or whatever. So I think, you know, if you want success in this business, if you think you've written a good song, go and write one that's better than that. It's about never ever saying this is good enough. It's about constantly striving to be better than that, to have a point of view, to I mean, sometimes it's a matter of luck as well. You know, sometimes there's 10 female singer-songwriter artists and the radio won't play another one, and the managers will go, you know what, we think now it's time for men with harmonicas, or, you know, 3-piece guitar bands, whatever. So it is very, very hard. There is no real advice, and you have to just keep at it. You know, you don't have very many overnight sensations, even if they look like they are. They've been behind the scenes working away. You know, I think if you want to be in the music business, do it because you love music, because you can't imagine not playing music. You might have to have another job as well to pay for it. And then if you're lucky, and if you have the talent, and if you're spotted by the right people, maybe it all works for you, but it doesn't always work. I mean, I've had, you know, not every one of the acts I represent is successful. and they're on one of the biggest talent agencies in the world, and they potentially assign to some of the biggest record labels in the world. But it doesn't happen for everybody, even when all the boxes are ticked.
And just turning this back to you, so what makes a successful agent? You know, have you got a real eye and ear for that kind of talent that can make it, or are there other things that you really need to become a great agent?
I think there's two parts to being a good agent. One is being able to find the talent and go, okay, yeah, I really believe that this is very, very special, what this person is doing or this band are doing. And then the other thing, lots of it is just learned. I mean, it's 10,000 hours of experience. It honestly is. So you start and you think you know everything because you're young, and that's how you should be when you're young. And then 20 years later, you look back at what you did when you were young and go, oh my goodness, that was terrible. How did that tour ever even leave my desk? Never mind a band actually do it, because it's a joke. So I think it's about working hard. I mean, to me, it's about being really honest. It's about being open to, you know, criticism, advice. It's about getting the job done. You know, it's working harder than anybody else. If you can outwork the competition, then you're going to do well. You know, the more time you put in, the more successful possibly you're going to become. And then I suppose some of it's luck. You know, I worked for, you know, Ian Flukes, the guy I started for, gave me opportunity. So he picked me, and then he said, okay, you can book this tour for Kraftwerk. And probably 18 months into working for him, I was working on a U2 tour, you know, a huge stadium tour, which many people would never work on an act like that in their lives, an act as big as that. But, you know, he and I had a connection, and he saw that I worked hard. And so I learnt, but I was in first and I was out last. And I think it's harder now, and particularly actually in this remote Zoom world that we live in, because sharing information doesn't happen as naturally, because every time you make a phone call or you send a text or an email or an IM, it attaches a level of importance to what you're going to say that may feel too much for the question you're asking or the information you want to share. You go, oh, they don't really need to know that. Whereas when we're all in the office together and we sit all open plan, I sit with everybody else, there's no hierarchy to it. I overhear conversations, other people overhear my conversations, and they pick up information. And when I started pre-email, we used faxes, and I made a habit. You know, the faxes came in and they all got dumped in a tray, and occasionally someone needed to hand them around to the agents or assistants that they were for. And I had a habit of reading every single thing before I handed it to anyone, particularly if it said private and confidential. That definitely I needed to read that one. And so I think from that as well, I learned, you know, I saw what deals were happening. I knew what was going on. And I think we've lost a little bit of that at the moment. I think it's really important that we all get back together. So, yeah, so those, you know, being a people person is important as an agent. And in my job, it's having a love of music or a love of theatre or a love of sport or whatever it is you're an agent for. You know, there's nothing more exciting than going to a gig and it's sold out. And it doesn't matter if it's 200 people or 200,000 people. You know, for that artist, this is a highlight. It's a big deal. It's a step towards the next big thing for them. And that's such a buzz. And when you've, you know, invested heart and soul into somebody's career and you're part of their team, you know, none of my achievement is me. I was part of a team working for someone else. You know, I don't sing the songs, I don't write the songs, I don't play the instruments, but I help people with their dreams and to achieve what they're setting out to do. And there's nothing better. And it worries me that I may have sounded a bit negative occasionally about how hard it is, but that's just reality. It is hard. But if you can't imagine doing anything else, and I represent people You know, guys that play guitars, they always have their guitar with them. If you sit anywhere with them, they are noodling away on their guitar because it's an extension of them. Those are the people that often do well because there's no option. There is no plan B for them.
Excellent. I mean, I guess there are a couple of students as well in the audience, and I saw one question, and maybe more than one, about what kind of degrees you think are best to prepare you, for like actor representation. I've got a question here: is for example, a drama school degree important? And I saw one earlier was talking about a business degree, or is it really about all these interpersonal skills you were talking about?
I think the best degree is a food science degree from Reading University, obviously.
Yeah.
I think there are certain things where you have to have a degree to do it, and if you're a doctor or if you're a lawyer, there are particular degrees you need to do. As an actor, I think doing an acting degree or an acting course clearly teaches you some tricks, and it puts you amongst like-minded people, so potentially you actually get great contacts through that. But there's plenty of actors that have never been to a drama school. There are plenty of agents that haven't been to a music college. I mean, in my day there was no such thing, so you couldn't. I think what's really important is actually practical experience. So if you want to be an agent, I don't necessarily, when I'm looking at new people to join the company, I'm as interested in what they've done outside of their degree or their A levels or the apprenticeship, because you don't have to have a degree to do these things either. I'm as interested in whether they've actually shown that they actively want to do the job as the course they've done. Because if you've just done a course, but this is a lifestyle, I think being an agent, being a sports person, being an actor, being a musician, it's a lifestyle that you have to embrace. And so if you don't show any of that, if you do a sports degree, you're not going to play Premiership football. You've got to be playing football all the time. So I look as much for those people that say, oh, they did the degree in whatever it might be, but they were also putting on a club night, or they managed a band, or they worked in the recording studio, or they put out their own music, or, things that show that actually they really want to get their hands dirty, because those are the people that we want.
There's a question from the audience from Paul Wheeler, and it may come back to where you were starting about how you organized bands at student union, and so he's asking a general question: how important are gigs at student unions for new and established artists? And he says, I remember seeing Muse third on the bill in 1998 at Reading University, and Coldplay at Oxford Brookes in 2000. So how important are student unions in the development of new bands?
I think they probably used to be more important than they are now. And that's not to say they're not, but I mean, those dates are quite a long time ago. And I'd be interested to know how, obviously pre-COVID, how many bands you were having at the university organised by the student union, and how many club nights, because certainly my experience over the last few years is that freshers events, freshers balls, summer balls, you have a band. Most of the rest of the time, what makes money for the Students' Union is club nights. People want to go and drink, and they want to dance around to, 50 different songs played. And so therefore that's in my terminology, that's a disco. In modern terminology, that's a club night. And so we don't see as many university shows as we used to, apart from those universities who have big halls that are basically on the commercial circuit, and most of the time are rented out by the national promoters. So Manchester University, Cardiff University, there's some that they're on the scene basically as venues. But I'm not seeing as many gigs at universities as they used to be. I'd love there to be more, because it would be great. but I remember, we used to do, even back in my day, it would be, okay, can we stick a band on in the club night? Because no one would come for the band. They'd come, back in the day, the bar was called the Mandela Bar. I assume it's been named something else because it's not that anymore. But and then you'd have a club night, and then what would happen was you would have the big disco in the main hall. Everyone would be having a great time. Then the band would come on for 30 minutes. Everyone would leave, go to the bar, and then they'd come back when the band had finished. And so, trust me, all of us agents and the managers and the bands would love to come and play at more student unions, but they are not featuring highly on the development of artists. And I think even, bands that are formed in university, you generally find that they're playing the local clubs in the town or city rather than playing at the university a lot of the time.
Mm. Just make best opportunity having you here. I'm asking you just some advice for, if I want to put Reading on the map as a venue that can attract these big bands like mentioned in Cardiff, you mentioned, what kind of size venue do I need? Just have a bit of land sitting outside here, so
probably 2,500.
2,500.
The problem that Reading has is you're very close to London, and so in some people's minds, because London is pretty much the biggest show on any tour and it's the one that generates the most money, promoters are slightly loath to have any shows that are too close in case everybody gets on that fast train and can do it. But I think gigs at a sort of 2,000 capacity, it makes financial sense. And if you make a room that you can maybe close a balcony or something so that if there's 1,000 people in there, it has a vibe to it, I think you'd get shows.
Okay.
I'll book some. I will make sure that CAA puts some bands in there.
Excellent. I'll come back to you on that. I got a few more questions left. One is quite interesting. It doesn't come with a name, but it says some areas of the creative industry have come under criticism for elitism, and we're now looking at potential funding cuts to some art courses in higher education. So what role do you think agencies such as yours can play in promoting artists and work that reflect our society today more broadly? That's a complicated one, isn't it?
It is a complicated one. Oh, Jesus Christ. Sorry, we'll talk through this unless you find it horrific. Hang on.
I think something very rude is being said there.
No, I was very, very polite to him. Exceedingly polite to him. I'm sorry. I bet everyone else that's done these has been way more professional than having the dog going crazy. I don't think that rock and roll music has ever really been elitist. But I think the role that the music industry can play in being more diverse and more inclusive is one that's really important. And you look at the charts now, a huge amount of artists that are, top 40 artists are people of color. There's a lot of rap, there's a lot of hip hop, all kinds of stuff. And yet you look at the music industry and they are underrepresented in the people that work with them, in the agents, in the executives at labels, in the managers, in the promoters across the board. They are underrepresented. And I think we're very aware of that. And there's a lot of effort to make things more diverse. I mean, we as a company go out to as many people as we can, are looking at, opportunities to get more Black, Asian, people of color, diverse people. There's still not enough women, never mind anything else. So I think it's work in progress, but it's very, very much something that people are aware of. And I think, while maybe the viewing figures at the Brits this week weren't huge, they did a fantastic job of having a very diverse offering for people to see that, you know, the music industry, the live music industry, British music, is not just all white guys with guitars.
Okay. Emma, I've got one more question from the audience and then one more question from myself. Andy posts himself as musician and alumnus, so you can see where it comes from. And he says you have highlighted very well the financial problems facing the music industry, certainly for live music. Do you think that Apple and Spotify can be forced to contribute some of the approximately 30% they make on all music sales to the benefit of niche and developing bands?
Be nice, wouldn't it, if they could? I mean, there's constant discussions about how much artists are earning from the streaming services, from the DSPs, and it's not something that's particularly in my wheelhouse as something that I am directly involved with. But I think you're starting to see all of them trying to champion younger music, and, you know, I'd add platforms like YouTube in there as well, who I think are doing more and more to make sure that it's not just the very biggest artists that get support. You know, how you actually administer it, I couldn't tell you. But I think, yeah, the industry as a whole is very aware of all of these issues. So fingers crossed, it would be nice if some more of the money could be distributed, for sure.
Okay, Emma, final question from you. I'm struck by your positivity in the current situation. So I just want to ask you for any advice you get offered to either our alumni or to students who are currently studying with us, how to stay positive and motivated in these challenging times. How have you done it, and how will you advise them? I think what you have to remember is that this will pass, because, you know, the highest points in your life pass and the lowest points in your life pass. And this is it feels like forever, but I think when we're out of it, we will probably forget it almost too quickly, I think. So I've been positive because I've kept myself really busy. I mean, my job keeps me very busy. I have interests outside of my job. So I love horse racing, and I have an interest in Luton Town Football Club, and we didn't get relegated. So this is all good news. So I think it's doing that and just being content, trying to be content with what you've got, which is incredibly hard at times like this. And I'm lucky, you know, I live in a nice house with a maniac dog, and actually taking the dog out or going for a walk has also, just getting out of the house occasionally. I realized in the first lockdown, I barely left the house, and that it was okay because I've got a little garden and it was sunny, but actually it was not good for me. And in the last 8 months, you know, I've made sure that I can, you know, I go for a walk for, you know, 2 or 3 miles. I'm not the fastest walker in the world. Just getting out there and not sitting looking at a screen has been good. But, you know, there are some people that are going to get very down at times like this. And to them, I say, reach out to, you know, whoever, to reach out to the services that are available. Speak to your friends. Don't be embarrassed about it. You know, I've got pretty good mental health, but I've got plenty of friends that don't. And, you know, I want to be there for them as I'm sure they would be for me. So, you know. And listening to good music, would that help? Listening to good music is fantastic. You know, there's nothing better, is there? You know, put on some disco and dance around the kitchen. It's that, you know, dance like no one's watching. I mean, no one is watching most of the time in the kitchen. You know, so there's been some amazing podcasts. I've learned about stuff as well that I wouldn't have had an opportunity if I was flying all over the place and was never getting to bed until 1 o'clock in the morning, which is my old life and no doubt soon to be my life again. So I think trying to use the time. I'm not one of these people that suddenly learned to speak Russian or, you know, got a life coaching degree, but I've done a few bits and pieces which have been fun. Emma Banks, thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you, Emma, it was a great discussion. I've learned more about the music industry than I thought possible in a space of an hour. If you ever want to trade places for a little while, you know, when things are back to normal, give me a ring. But it was very engaging, and thanks very much for your honest answers. To the audience, you know, you'll be able to watch the recording of this event, and the events team will be in touch over the next few days to confirm how you can access this. And we hope maybe to see you again on our next event, which is on Thursday, the 10th of June, when we will feature an inspiring panel of alumni who have been working on the front line treating COVID-19 themselves. Now, we will put a link to this event on the Q&A panel, or it's already there, and we hope to see you again soon. In the meantime, stay safe and good night. Bye-bye.